One night, after a performance, a fan shouted from the crowd, "You sound like Sam Cooke." Smokey froze. The words hit him harder than any applause. For years, he had carried the weight of that comparison in silence. But in that instant, he knew he could not keep it hidden anymore. What he revealed about Sam Cooke was a confession that changed everything we thought we knew about their connection. Deep admiration and unseen seeds. Smokey Robinson's story begins in the streets of Detroit, where music was never far away. In his childhood home, gospel songs spilled out from church doors, and the radio carried voices that sounded almost otherworldly. Among them was one that struck him more deeply than the rest. It belonged to Sam Cooke. For Smokey, hearing Cooke was not just listening to another singer. It was something that shook him to his core. The devotion in the voice, the tremor that seemed to carry both joy and sorrow, left an impression that would never fade. He would later admit that this sound felt like a calling, something that made him want to reach higher, to understand what true emotion in music could mean. In those early years, Smokey's world was small, yet the dreams that began to grow inside him were not. To him, Sam Cooke quickly became more than just a singer on the radio. He became a measuring stick, a dream, and a secret rival to surpass one day. In his own words, Smokey once said, "Sam Cooke had one of the most unique and original singing styles I ever heard. He was my favorite." The honesty in that confession reveals how powerful the connection was. It was not the polished surface of Cooke's music that Smokey admired most, but the heart underneath it. There is a story Smokey has told that captures this influence perfectly. One night he heard "Bring It On Home to Me." The song carried a rawness and a plea that felt deeply personal. Smokey described the moment by saying to himself, "I want people to feel what he makes me feel." It was not enough for him to just enjoy the record. He wanted to capture that same magic in his own songs, to let listeners find the same kind of ache, longing, and comfort that Sam poured into every note. It was no accident then that when Smokey began writing, he leaned on that inspiration. Years later, he revealed, "You've Really Got a Hold on Me" was inspired by Sam Cooke and Lou Rawls's "Bring It On Home to Me." That confession pulled back the curtain on how deeply embedded Cooke was in Smokey's creative process. It was a tribute, but also proof that the lessons Smokey had learned by listening closely had turned into something living within his own music. To the audience, Smokey was carving out his own place in Motown, writing timeless songs and leading the miracles. Yet beneath those achievements was a young man quietly trying to reach the bar set by his favorite singer. But it was not until decades later, standing on a stage under harsh lights, that Smokey realized the full cost of idolizing Sam Cooke, not just its inspiration, but its burden. What he reveals then changes how he sees all the songs he has ever sung. Smokey Robinson's revelations. By the time Smokey Robinson reached his 80s, the weight of years gave him a kind of freedom. He no longer needed to hold back certain truths, and so he began to speak more openly about the man who had shaped so much of his music. Sam Cooke had always been present in his work, even in ways Smokey had not admitted to himself. Now, with a lifetime behind him, he confessed that Sam's tone, timing, and breathing had been lessons he carried in silence. "I listened to everything he did," Smokey shared. As he reflected, Smokey admitted that some of his songs critics thought sounded like Cooke's were in fact written as intentional homages. He smiled while recalling Sam's influence. Yet, there was another side to the story. Smokey also admitted there were songs he never wrote, melodies he stopped himself from finishing because he feared being accused of copying. In his younger years, he wanted the world to know his voice and not think of him as standing in another man's shadow. That fear sometimes silenced him, even when his heart wanted to follow where the music led. It was in later interviews and private reflections that the reckoning came. Hearing younger artists cover Sam Cooke reminded Smokey of the depth of that influence. He realized it was both a gift and a shadow. A gift because Sam had given him the tools to feel, to write, to sing with honesty. A shadow because no matter how high Smokey climbed, there would always be echoes of Cooke behind him. In an interview with The Guardian, Smokey praised Sam's phrasing and vulnerability. He said Sam had that pathos. That gives it a really intimate sound. For Smokey, that intimacy was the heart of why Sam's songs lived forever. Smokey spoke with a mix of pride and humility. Pride because his admiration had turned into timeless music of his own. Humility because he knew that even his greatest songs carried traces of a man whose voice had first awakened something inside him. It was as if every note Smokey sang was in conversation with Sam, even long after Sam was gone. And then Smokey confesses there was one song he never dared write, one direction he never dared go, because Sam had done it first. What was that song? And what stopped him? Let's find out. Acknowledging the echoes and the hauntings. There are moments in Smokey Robinson's career when the echoes of Sam Cooke are impossible to ignore. "You've Really Got a Hold on Me" is the clearest example. A song Smokey himself admitted was directly inspired by "Bring It On Home to Me." But the influence did not stop there. It lingered in melodies that carried the same gentle pleading quality, in pauses that gave listeners space to feel the ache, and in the way Smokey could weave gospel tones into secular songs without losing their intimacy. To the audience, those choices felt natural. To Smokey, they were traces of a man whose voice had never left his ear. As he looked back on his catalog in interviews and conversations, Smokey sometimes heard Cooke more clearly than himself. He admitted that Sam's phrasing and delivery had shaped the way he approached certain songs. There were even moments of regret. Smokey confessed in private that now and then he wished he had phrased a lyric differently because the way he sang it sounded too close to Sam. Those tiny decisions mattered to him. He wanted the world to hear his originality, to know his songs stood on their own. Yet no matter how he shifted a word or bent a note, the ghost of Sam's delivery was always there, haunting the edges. It was both a comfort and a burden. This tension followed Smokey throughout his life. On one hand, he admired Sam with complete honesty. On the other hand, that admiration carried the weight of expectation. The struggle was constant, as though every song carried a quiet question. Was this Smokey Robinson, or was this Smokey channeling Sam Cooke? On social media, Smokey was open about the debt he owed. Even after decades of success, the echoes remained, shaping him in ways the audience rarely realized. And then came a haunting moment. In one late-night recording session, Smokey paused the tape after hearing a shocking news. Why? Because in those seconds, he heard Sam Cooke inside his own heart more clearly than ever before. What Sam Cooke's absence taught me. Sam Cooke's death in December 1964 was not just a headline for Smokey Robinson, it was a wound. Cooke was only 33, in the prime of his career, when he was shot at the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles under circumstances that were murky then and remain debated to this day. Reports said Sam had been shot by the motel's manager, Bertha Franklin, after what was described as a struggle. Police accounts painted a story of Sam bursting into the office, half-dressed, demanding to know where a woman he had been with had gone. Franklin claimed she shot in self-defense. But for Smokey and countless others in the music world, those details did not bring clarity. They brought confusion, sorrow, and suspicion. The official verdict was ruled justifiable homicide, but many in the black community and many fellow artists felt uneasy, believing there was more to the story. Smokey was left with the same questions. Why had a man who seemed to be on the cusp of reshaping American music and black ownership in the industry been taken so suddenly, so violently? The tragedy made the loss heavier. This was not just death by chance or illness. It was messy, unexplained, tainted by injustice. Smokey has often spoken about the sense of unfinished business that hovered after Sam's death. Cooke had been laying the groundwork for independence as a black artist, owning masters, running his own label, setting an example for others. Smokey admired him not only for the sound of his voice, but for the courage in his choices. With his death, that light dimmed, and Smokey felt the responsibility shift. For Smokey, the tragedy was not only losing an idol, but losing a mentor he never really got to sit down with. I always wanted to talk to him about songwriting, about where he thought the music could go, Smokey admitted in later interviews. That conversation never happened. The 1960s were already heavy years. The civil rights movement was changing America, and the pressure on black artists was enormous. Sam had shown how to carry that weight, blending gospel roots with soul and speaking out when others stayed silent. With his death, Smokey felt the torch fall closer to him. He had to keep making music that mattered, even while still grieving. Sometimes, listening back to his own songs, Smokey could feel Sam's spirit inside the phrasing, the pauses, the emotion. It was both comfort and reminder, echo and shadow. Sam's absence pushed him to write, but it also haunted him with the sense of unfinished business. There were songs unrecorded, conversations never had, and a future never lived. Sam was fearless, Smokey said years later. He showed us we could have a voice not just in music, but in the business. And then he was gone. Years afterward, Smokey often asked himself, if Sam had lived to 50, 60, 70, what would he have written? Would he have changed the sound of soul forever? And would Smokey's own songs have existed in the same way? Joy, fear, and the courage to diverge. The first time Smokey Robinson met Sam Cooke, he was already in awe. Sam was the voice of gospel-turned soul, a man whose songs were everywhere, carrying both power and tenderness. Smokey was still carving his path at Motown, young but already showing signs of brilliance. For him, meeting Sam was like stepping into a room with someone whose songs had already shaped his heart. Smokey often remembered that moment vividly. He said, "Sam was my favorite singer of all time. Meeting him was like meeting a hero, but he never made me feel small. He had this way of making you feel like you were his equal." That first meeting was more than an introduction. It was the beginning of a bond built on mutual respect. Their collaboration was not about contracts or business arrangements. It was about friendship, conversation, and inspiration. They would spend hours talking about music, about gospel roots, about how songs should make people feel something deep inside. Smokey admired Sam's courage in breaking barriers, owning his music, and demanding respect in an industry that often tried to silence black artists. Sam admired Smokey's gift for words, for turning simple emotions into poetry that touched people everywhere. Though their time together was short, the impact of their connection lasted. Smokey carried Sam's spirit in his songs, in his performances, in his constant reminder that music was more than just sound. It was a legacy. When people asked Smokey about Sam today, his answer remained simple but profound. "Sam was my favorite. He still is." For Smokey Robinson, the hardest part of loving Sam Cooke's music was learning when to step close and when to step away. Every time Smokey wrote a melody or stood in front of a microphone, he had to ask himself, was he honoring Sam or was he repeating him? There were warnings too. Mentors and industry figures sometimes reminded Smokey to find his lane. They told him Motown's power came from originality. Peers who loved Sam as deeply as Smokey did would nod and say, almost like a warning, "Don't get lost in his shadow." Even members of Sam's circle, people who admired Smokey's talent, would gently suggest that Sam's voice belonged to Sam alone. That kind of advice stung, but Smokey listened. After Sam's death, Smokey began experimenting with different song structures, letting the miracles lean into harmonies that carried a more Motown sound. He found vulnerability in his own way, more conversational, less like the sweeping gospel pull of Sam's style. It was a path that kept him close to his hero, but gave him the space to breathe as an artist. And yet, the shadow was always there. One night after a performance, a fan shouted from the crowd, "You sound like Sam Cooke." Smokey froze, caught between pride and fear. Then he smiled and gave an answer that no one expected. What he said next revealed more about what Sam's influence had cost him than any song ever could. Smokey's love for Sam wasn't ordinary. It carried roots, stories, and a powerful background that few people ever knew. Let's tell you those details. 2 lives, 1 mirror. When Smokey Robinson looks back on his life, he often sees Sam Cooke's story reflected in his own. Their paths were not identical, but the echoes are clear enough to make Smokey pause. Both were born into music through faith and family. Sam came out of the church, his father a minister who guided him through gospel choirs. Smokey, growing up in Detroit, was also surrounded by gospel voices and learned early that singing was more than entertainment. It was a calling. "That was the first music I ever heard," Smokey recalled of the church sound. It was also the first sound Sam carried with him when he stepped into popular music. Both men felt the pull of ambition from a young age. Sam moved from gospel groups like the Soul Stirrers into the mainstream, breaking barriers with his crossover success. Smokey, still a teenager, was already writing songs and chasing Berry Gordy through Detroit with a notebook full of lyrics. Each carried the same hunger to take the voice they were born with and make it reach the widest audience possible. They were young, unafraid, and convinced that music could change their lives. The struggles came quickly. Sam fought against an industry that wanted to own him. Contracts were designed to keep black artists poor, while their songs made millions for record labels. Instead of accepting it, Sam founded his own label and his own publishing company. A daring move in the late 1950s. Smokey saw the same patterns in Motown. While Motown was a home to him, it was also a machine, and he had to fight for creative control, for respect as a songwriter, and for his place beyond just being another voice in a hit factory. Both men knew what it meant to be underestimated, and both pushed back with determination. There were personal battles too. Fame is a gift, but it is also a weight. Sam's personal life was often chaotic, marked by temptations, scandals, and pressures he could not always control. Smokey has admitted his own struggles with temptation, with mistakes, and even with addiction later in life. In those moments, he felt closer to Sam, understanding how success can both elevate and endanger a man. "It is easy to get lost in the noise," Smokey once said, and he knew Sam had felt the same. Their lives also carried the same thread of responsibility. Both men were more than entertainers. They were symbols of hope in a changing America. Sam wrote songs that spoke directly to the civil rights struggle, while Smokey used his music to tell stories that carried dignity and love into homes across the country. Each bore the burden of representation, knowing that every lyric and every performance mattered beyond themselves. And in their reflections, mortality lingered. Sam's life ended abruptly, a tragedy that Smokey has never forgotten. Smokey, now in his 80s, sometimes wonders why he was allowed the years Sam never had. That question ties them even closer. One man's story cut short became another man's guiding light. Smokey often says he still feels Sam beside him. In their joy, in their struggles, in their triumphs, their lives run parallel like verses in the same song. Different voices, but one melody. Carrying forward the legacy of Sam Cooke. When Sam Cooke died, Smokey Robinson felt a hole open up in music. Sam had only just begun to show what was possible for a black artist, owning his masters, running his own label, and writing songs that spoke directly to the struggle of his people. Smokey was still at the start of his own journey, but he understood that Sam's torch could not be allowed to go out. Carrying the legacy also meant protecting the dignity of soul music. Sam had shown that gospel-rooted singing could thrive in the mainstream without losing its spirit. Smokey followed that path, crafting songs that blended poetry, faith, and emotion while reaching across boundaries. He gave Motown its heartbeat with his songwriting, offering Berry Gordy and the label the very foundation that would lift artists like Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and The Temptations. In doing so, he was honoring what Sam had begun, proving that black music could be both deeply rooted and universally loved. Smokey also carried Sam's legacy in the way he fought quietly for respect within the industry. Sam had been bold and public in his demands, creating his own business empire before his death. Smokey, though less confrontational, did his part by writing hundreds of songs that became standards. By proving himself as a songwriter and not just a singer, he carved out creative power within Motown, a place where many artists were simply told what to record. His success meant that artists after him had more leverage, more voice, and more recognition for their craft. The impact of both men stretches far beyond charts and awards. Sam Cooke gave soul its conscience. He sang about freedom, heartbreak, and hope in a way that gave voice to millions. Smokey Robinson gave soul its poetry. His words wrapped around everyday experiences and made them timeless. Together, even though their paths only overlapped for a short while, they shifted the center of music. They showed that soul could be elegant and raw, joyful and sorrowful, personal and political. Smokey has often said that he feels Sam's presence every time he walks on stage. Today, when young artists trace their inspirations, they almost always mention both names, Sam Cooke as the pioneer and Smokey Robinson as the poet who carried the flame. Their impact on the industry is not measured only in records sold, but in doors opened, in songs that still matter, and in the proof that soul music could stand forever. What are your thoughts on Smokey's revelation about Sam Cooke? Do you think his honesty changes the way we see his music and their bond? Share your thoughts below.